Hey guys, Sam Millard from Panhandle Precision. Welcome to episode 5 of the Precision Rifle Load Development video series. Okay, today we're going to do a little more shooting. I've loaded up some 140 grain Berger hybrids to add into the mix, as well as some 5-shot strings with 130 grain Berger hybrids. We're also going to talk about some of the strategies that I use to figure out what my next step's going to be. Before I start, I'll just point out that I haven't done any shooting for the last couple of weeks. I dropped the rifle off to get it Cerakoted almost exactly 2 weeks ago. So you can see it's all pretty and black now. I think they shoot a little bit better when they're painted, but anyway, I like it. I think it turned out really well. Really slick looking rifle. Now we've had some pretty nasty weather come in over the last couple of days, actually the last 3 or 4 days, and we have about a foot more snow on the ground than we did the last time I shot, as well as 2 mornings in a row now where the low temperatures were below 0. So this morning it was -7, right now it's somewhere in the teens, and the wind's blowing a little bit. So I don't know how well I'm going to shoot, and I don't know how long I'm going to stay out here shooting, but the only way to make once fired brass is to shoot them through the barrel, so that's my plan. Okay, I've got some questions over the last couple of weeks about what my next step's going to be and how do I go about testing all these different loads and everything, and what's my method, I guess, is what they were asking. And specifically, do I do any ladder testing or optimal charge weight testing or any of that kind of stuff? What you see is what I do. I shoot 3-shot groups to begin with, and then I start working in 5-shot groups. Eventually I'll probably run some 10-shot groups, but not very many of them. It's my opinion that 10-shot groups are more of a test of the shooter than they are the gun. If you've ever done it before, you know it's hard to sit there and not psych yourself out, not to throw that number 8, number 9, number 10 when you're getting a really nice group going. So while I do 10-shot groups with rifles like this, I don't do very many of them. I'll just throw my opinion out there as to a better method, and that is to do multiple 3-shots or multiple 5-shot groups onto the same target in the same session, but don't try to push yourself into it. I know everybody's going to say that, well, that's not really a good statistical test of the barrel, but I would opine that if you're shooting several 5-shot groups into the same hole over and over and over with that same load, then it's probably a pretty solid load, and inducing a 10-shot group into it is only testing you rather than the barrel. So as far as reliability and repeatability, I like to see multiple 5-shot groups onto the same target into the same hole. And I think that's a true test of it. An even better way, and I know this is kind of off the whole purpose of this gun for a second, but from a long-range hunting standpoint, I like to do 1 shot onto a target multiple times. So in other words, what I'll do is I'll hang a target down there at 100 yards, I'll do a confirmation 0 shot, bang, and if my 0's perfect, I'll leave the target sitting right there and put the gun away. I'll come out the next day, lay down prone again, and shoot another shot right into that same target. And what I want to see is that bullet going into that same hole over and over and over several different times. So I think that's a better test than just laying down and trying to prove that you can not screw up and throw a shot that you know full well the barrel is capable of doing. So as far as 3-shot, 5-shot, 10-shot groups, that's kind of my thought on it. As far as ladder testing or OCW testing and all that stuff, I don't even really know what all that stuff is, to tell you the truth. So what I'm doing is what you see me doing is what I do. So if you want to try that stuff, you're gonna have to go somewhere else to get all the details on it. I guess all I can say is that you don't have to do anything that's got a fancy name or anything like that to come up with a good load. I've been doing this for 25 years with a variety of different rifles, factory rifles, custom rifles, long-range rifles, and it's always worked for me. Other guys that I know do exactly the same thing. So you'll want to tailor your load development to whatever kind of resources you have available. If you have a range where you can shoot 300, 400, 500 yards onto paper targets regularly, and you have access to it and you can do it all the time, then maybe you want to look into some of that ladder testing. But I don't have access to that kind of range, so my initial testing is all going to be at 100 yards. And when we get further along in this series, you'll see how I go about figuring out which load's the best, which one is my optimum load, which one has the lowest ES, which one has the best velocity, and I'll also show some repeatability. And by the time we get around to getting out and shooting long range, I'm going to have full confidence in that load. So you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to have an acronym to how you do your load development. Just go out and shoot and keep good notes and you'll see a pattern sooner or later. It's not rocket science. I mean, you're literally just putting components together in a way that your barrel likes to shoot them. So every barrel is going to be a little bit different. You know, after I've shot 260 Remington for so long, I can tell you that there are some recipes that are almost always good in every single barrel. You'll eventually come across a barrel that doesn't like a particular bullet, even though the last barrel you had did. And, you know, who knows, this barrel might be that way too. I know I have at least one bullet that this thing is an absolute screamer with, so I always have something to fall back on. But I also have a couple other bullets I'd like to try in it before I, you know, pick one and run with it. But anyway, the last time I was out here, right before I dropped this off, I tried to do a pressure string and run up to high pressure so I could show you guys what that looked like, and I failed miserably. I went up to, I think, 44.5 grains, H4350, with 130 grain, it was a Hornady 130 grain ELDM sitting on top of it, and I never hit high pressure. At the end, I got just a little bit of wipe on the brass, but I never got a hard ejector mark, and I never got a hard bolt lift. I have all that data written down. When we move back into the house, I'll go over that really quick. I also put in some 5-shot strings with those 130 grain ELDMs that held under a ½ inch at 100 yards. So I have a couple of really good loads that I like right now. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of take a peek at these 140 grain hybrids and go back over the 130 grain hybrids and see how they shoot. All right, let's hurry up and get some shooting done, then I'm going to move this whole show into the house. Well, that was fun. Not really. I don't really like shooting that much anymore in really cold weather like that. But anyway, I thought I did pretty well. At least through the first 3 strings when I was shooting the 140 grain hybrids, everything felt really good when I was popping the trigger and all that kind of stuff. By the time I got into shooting the 5-shot strings with those hybrids, I caught myself really messing up a couple of times, and I think that's what happened with that first 5-shot group, was that I caught myself holding the stock instead of letting it sit on the bag, and I was breathing while I was shooting, and I thought, you know, this is just dumb. When I saw that first shot land almost a minute low, I thought, man, what was that? And then the second one hit. All right, hold steady on the target and shoot. Third one went in the same hole. That's not to say that that's all of it. You know, maybe it just doesn't like those 130 hybrids, but I noted that in my notebook that I caught myself doing that, and by the time I shot the second group, it tightened right back up again. It's only a half grain difference, so I'll probably owe it to that bullet at least and to myself to try that load again. The other thing that I didn't like was I didn't have my spike feet bipod, and it was really slippery out there, so my bipod was moving all over the place, and I kept trying to pull the gun into me, and the whole thing was just bad. Not to make excuses, but you know, this whole load development thing is about testing the gun, so you need to make sure that what you're doing, everything you're doing is perfect, so that you take yourself out of the equation as a variable. Before I get too far down the road, I want to talk about a couple of things that guys have asked me about. One of those is how quickly do I shoot? In other words, how long do I wait between shots when I'm doing this kind of work, this load development? Well, when it's, you know, winter time like it is now, below freezing with some wind and everything, you could pretty much, at least in my experience, you could pretty much shoot a gun like this as fast as you can shoot. The first part of this video where I showed myself shooting the 3-shot groups with those 140 grain hybrids, that is the exact tempo that I'm shooting at right now. I'm pausing just long enough to make sure that I'm focused and concentrated on my breathing and pushing the trigger straight back and holding the crosshair right where I want it to be. You know, if you can't hold a 1/4 minute of angle, you certainly can't shoot a 1/4 minute of angle. So make sure that I make sure that I'm holding exactly how I want to when I pop them off. So that first 9 shots is exactly the tempo. I edited out myself loading the magazine, but I never turned the cameras off. So I would shoot the 3 shots, and then I'd reach over and load the magazine. I'd adjust the turret on the scope to move my point of impact over a little bit, load it back up, and start shooting again. So that whole, the 3-shot sequence probably took 4 minutes total for that whole thing. And then when I shot the 2 5-shot group strings, I think it was probably 6 or 7 minutes to shoot both of those groups. So, you know, you don't have to, at least on a gun like this, you don't have to wait very long, especially when it's cold out. But remember, this is a PRS competition rifle, so it's going to be exposed to pretty damn fast rates of fire. You know, those a lot of those stages are going to be 1.5 to 2 minutes, and you need to fire 10 to 12 shots if you don't run out of time. So, you know, it's got to take it. So I don't have any problem at all shooting this gun fast. But during load development, all I want to make sure is that I'm holding right where I want to be holding, and I'm pushing the trigger straight back and not screwing anything up. Which is why I was so critical about that first 5-shot string of 130 grain burgers. But all in all, I think that some of the data I got off those targets is pretty good. The 140 grain hybrid load, it looks like the best one was the 43 grains H4350 that came in just over 1/2 inch. I could probably tighten that up. All of these have potential, so I'm not going to discard those loads yet. Okay, so our next subject is going to be working with seating stems. Okay, I think one of the most important factors to having good ammo, especially for long-range precision work, is having a consistent seating depth. So you need to have a seating depth that the barrel likes, obviously, but you also need to make sure that all your bullets are seated to that depth as closely as you can get them. So typically, I was asked this question pointedly about how much of a variation I allow in my ammo. And when I'm doing load workups like I am now, I set them at 0. Every single one of them has to be exactly the same. And if I overseat one, in other words, make it too long, then I just put it off to the side, and that's going to get shot for something. but I'll just pull another piece of new brass out, make up another round, and get that one right to the money. So when I'm doing this load development, I'm going to make sure that they're all within 1/1000th of an inch, and I try to just make them all 0. But sometimes, you know, you get a 5/10 thousandths off or something. I don't worry about that. Now when I move into building ammo in bulk, so 200 or 300 rounds at a time, I am not going to sit there and measure every one of them as I go through. It's just not practical. That's too many rounds to measure. But by the time I get there, I will have kept notes in my book about what my seating dies will allow me to do. In other words, if I'm using the 130 grain ELDM, do all of them seat at the same depth without me messing with it? Are they an issue? You know, is it a problem? How about the 130 hybrids or 140 VLDs or whatever bullet I'm using? Do they allow me to seat all the bullets exactly where I want them? And that's not all in the bullet. That's also a function of neck tension and things, and compressed charges, things like that. But a lot of it is the bullet, and a lot of it revolves around how the bullet is contacting the seating stem in your seating dies. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over setting up a Redding competition seater, and then we're going to take a look at the different seating stems that are in these dies. So this is a regular, just a plain Jane Redding bullet seating die in 260 Remington. I've never used this one. It still had the oil in it. But what I did was I marked up some bullets, and I'll show you where the seating stem contacts that bullet. And then what we're going to do is look at some of the notes that I kept on how the bullets were seated in each of these dies. So one other thing I do have, I was asked on whether or not the Redding competition seating dies come with a VLD seating stem, and I didn't know. I just said, hey, I don't know if they do come with them, but the one I have works really well. And I left it at that. Well, since then I did a little research. My friend Sean Carlock, he builds his own dies for some of his Terminator cartridges, and he buys a lot of these seating stem type parts from Redding. So I asked him about it. He says, yeah, there's 2 different stems, and they mark the VLD stem with a groove in the stem body. So he gave me one to try, and what I did was I looked at the difference on where the bullet seated, where it contacted the seating stem, and I'll show you all that, but it was pretty interesting to see how it worked. And I'll tell you right now that the VLD seating stem might not work better than the standard stem, but anyway, when we get over to the loading bench, we'll go over all that. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of seating dies here. These are both 260 Remington seating dies. This is a standard Redding, just a plain Jane one that you would get in a a $40 or $45 set of dies. The other one is the Redding competition seating die. This one's quite a bit more expensive, and it has some features to it that mostly for me add some convenience. The biggest thing about this one is it has a micrometer adjustable top, so you can adjust the seating depth in 1/1000th of an inch increments as you run this up and down. I find that really handy. The other thing that this is supposed to do for you is support the cartridge completely during the seating process. So it has a sleeve that's spring-loaded. These suckers are long. It has a spring-loaded sleeve here that the case sits in. So when it goes in, it's supported by that sleeve, and it's spring-loaded. So when when you push the case up into the die, it has tension on it the entire time. I don't know how much of a difference that makes. In fact, I can tell you right now that I just seated 30 rounds with the standard die here that has nothing like that in it. I'll take that out real quick too, but anyway, I sized, or didn't size, I seated 30 rounds with that just a plain Jane die, and my run out was 3/1000ths across all of them with new brass. That's pretty good. So anyway, a regular seating die isn't going to have that floating sleeve. It just has a cavity that is cut roughly to the size of the case. So your case isn't flopping around in there or anything. It's not super tight, but it's also not flopping around. But anyway, that's the difference between the two. The setup is very similar. With the standard die, you have to loosen this lock nut and then make your adjustments on the screw here. It just goes in. If you go clockwise, it'll turn it in, which will seat your bullet deeper into the case. And if you pull it out, it'll make the round longer. That's the biggest difference between the two for me, is that the adjustment on the competition die is so much easier to do in small increments than the standard die is. Okay, there's the two dies taken apart with the guts out of them. The one on the left is a standard seating die, so you have the body, and then this is the stem that goes in the top, and that's where the bullet goes, is right into this cavity. And then the competition seater, it has the body of the die. There's a micrometer top with a spring, and then this is the sleeve that the case body is supported with. On top of the sleeve is the seating stem. So if we just pop that out, this is the seating stem. This is the part that the bullet goes into. And I'm sure that's hard for the camera to focus on, so I'll just set it right there. So we have a standard seating stem here, and then we also have what they call a VLD seating stem. And the angle inside the cone and the stem is different between the two stems. A lot of guys like this one for VLDs, for burger VLDs. I haven't tried it much. This is the one that I have in my 260 Terminator die, and it works very well in that. My inconclusive testing, I would call it, with the Hornady ELDM, it tells me that it actually prefers the standard stem over the ELD or the VLD stem. I'll show you in a couple minutes what it looks like on the bullet, where it contacts the bullet, and what the difference is, and then we'll also talk a little bit about why it matters. But anyway, those are the two dies. That's what they look like inside. One thing, that if you want a VLD stem, the only difference that you can see on the outside of them is the VLD stem has a groove in the body of it, and that particular one for a 6.5, which would be a 260 and I believe a 6.5 Creedmoor, the part number is a 55746. Okay, so we have the three seating stems. The one I think is called a plug, the one on the left, and that's for just a regular straight up seating die from Redding. So it's a whole plug, you can't replace the stem or anything. But the shiny part on the ogive up towards the tip, what I did was I just marked all these bullets. These are 130 grain ELDMs, and I marked them with Sharpie right down to the bearing surface up to the tip. So where the Sharpie is gone up towards the tip is where the seater stem or the plug is actually contacting it. So all I did was I stuffed it up in there and then spun it with my fingers. So you can see the one on the left has a pretty a wide contact surface, so it's really grabbing a hold of that bullet firmly right in the same spot. Now as we come over towards the right, the one in the middle is the VLD seating stem, and it kind of tries to do what the regular one did, but not so well. So you still have a pretty sharp edge, but you also have some contact area up towards the nose of the bullet. Now the one over on the right, that's a regular seating stem for the competition seater die, and you can see up towards the tip that it contacted it in one specific area in a relatively narrow band, and actually in my testing, at least between the two and the seating die, that one gave me more consistent seating depths. Now the band that's down towards the bearing surface at the bottom of the ogive there, that is where the comparator, the bullet insert for the comparator, touches it when I do my cartridge-based ogive length measurements. So I just did that just to show you where that is. So now what I was talking about earlier about keeping notes, when I load up a big block of ammo right now and I start seating these bullets all at the same depth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the first couple of them and make sure that I have the exact cartridge-based ogive length that I want, and then I'm going to start running them up into that die, and every one that comes out I'm going to measure it. And what I'll start seeing is a pattern. Do they all seat to exactly the same depth, or are some longer and some shorter? What's the deal there? And usually what happens is, once you get the first couple of them set up, the ones that come after that are going to be longer if they're not the same length. So what I'll do is I'll just look at it and I'll say, okay, out of 50 of them, 47 of them seated to the exact length without me having to do anything. 2 of them seated 1 or 2 thousandths longer, and if they do that, I'm really happy. I am completely happy with that on 6.5 bullets at least. For some reason, 300 Win Mag, the big 210 grain VLDs, I haven't had any problems at all with those with the standard stem in the Redding competition seater die. It seats every single one of those to exactly the same length. But in the 6.5s and 260, 6.5 284, 260 Terminator, there has been some variances depending on what I was working with. The things that influence that, I'm sure, are neck tension, you know, either a lot of neck tension or not enough neck tension. What does the, you know, basically what it is how much resistance does the bullet have when it's going in, because that cedar stem is contacting the bullet. So, you know, if you have more resistance in one seating stroke than you do in the next, the amount of crush or whatever between that stem and the nose of the bullet is probably going to change a little bit. And you remember, we're talking about 1/1000ths or 2/1000ths of an inch, and you know, that's a piece of post-it note is 4/1000ths of an inch thick, so it's not a lot. But when you're trying to get them all to the same length, it can be frustrating. So basically what I'm telling you is that while I'm doing my load development and all that, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure every one of them is exactly the same length, just because it's a variable and I want to eliminate it. But once I find a good load, I'm going to go back through my notes and say, okay, the standard Redding seating die did the best. It was the most consistent at seating 130 grain hybrids. So I'm going to set that die up for my 130 grain hybrid load and run them all through that die. But my standard seating stem was the best for 130 grain ELDs. I only had 2 out of 100 that were off spec, so I'm just going to run them through that. And when I do that, I'll set it up, I'll make sure it's at the right length, and then I'll just run a whole block of ammo through it without picking up my calipers again. They're just, you know, I've shot rounds that were 1 to 2/1000ths off the rest of them, and I couldn't tell the difference on a chronograph, and I couldn't tell the difference on a target, whether it's short range or long range. So 1 to 2/1000ths difference in seating depth isn't going to kill you. Okay, judging by the emails that I got this past week about seating depths, I think we need to go over and touch on that again. I will warn you against going into the lands when you get up into the, you know, the top end of your powder charges. So if you're, you know, nearing your max charge, or even, you know, 2/3 of the way up there, you're going to want to be really careful that you aren't jamming the bullet into the lands, because it will cause pressure really fast. You know, bench rest shooters, a lot of them soft seat their bullets, so they run very, very little neck tension on their rounds, and they seat them long right here on their bench, and then when they get to the chute, they just put the round in there and they let the bullet go into the lands and seat itself. And as long as you run exactly the same tension and everything in your necks, that's going to put that bullet exactly in the same place for every round. But they also aren't running high pressure, they aren't in the field where they might have to extract that round. You know, it's just not a good idea for guns like this. So I stay away from the lands. That's why I start 10/1000ths off the lands, and I never get any closer than that usually. Very, very rarely have I had a rifle that had to have the bullet seated right at the lands to shoot well. They've, you know, all the ones in recent history that I can remember at least have liked to shoot 10/1000ths or 20/1000ths off the lands, and they maintained good accuracy and good velocity ES and everything, even as far out as 30 or 40 when the throat started to burn. So, you know, I stay away from the lands. So just remember that if your cartridge-based ogive length is, say, 2.650, you need to go to 2.640 to get 10/1000ths off the lands. So remember, you need to make it shorter to get further away, you need to make it longer to get closer, but personally, I do not recommend getting any closer than 10/1000ths off the lands. Practice that cartridge-based ogive measurement with your modified case until you're comfortable with it. And remember, when you're looking at a loading manual, those loading manuals are all based on SAMI spec cartridge dimensions. So they took one bullet when they designed the case, they stuck it in there and said, this is what our dimensions are going to be. And since that cartridge was drawn up, who knows how many different bullets have been introduced, you know, from all the different manufacturers. So when you look in a loading manual, they don't account for every bullet and change that cartridge overall length. It's always going to be the same length. Okay, well, my next step is going to be loading up larger batches of the best looking loads so that I can do some things like check to see what my suppressor point of impact change is. I want to put the magneto speed bayonet on it and see if I can shoot into the same point of impact, as well as start to get some initial velocity numbers. When I tried to do that pressure string, I got a pretty good look at what it was capable of with that load, and it's pretty comparable to some other 260 barrels. So I don't know what this barrel is going to be like yet, whether or not it's going to be fast or slow or whatever. I like to wait until I get 200 or 300 rounds down the tube to really get a good look at what it's capable of and where it's going to settle in for long-term velocity. Now, when I did the pressure string, I also loaded up some 5-shot groups of the 130 grain ELDM and got a couple under a ½ inch, shooting those 130s with, what was it, 43 grains H4350. So what I'll probably do is load up a really big batch, maybe 20 or 30 rounds of that load, and just shoot them. Part of that's just to get to once-fired brass as quickly as I can. My best accuracy, my best ES, and velocity and all those things are going to come after I cycle through this new brass and get into once-fired brass. Then we're going to start sizing that brass and getting my neck tension right where I want it to be, and the barrel should be completely seasoned, I guess, for lack of a better word, by then. But anyway, look forward to some more of that stuff in the future. I'll be doing episodes on this as long as it takes, and work right into some of the shooting I'll do with the gun. So for all those guys that are asking about when the next episodes are going to come out, I need to generate some data. I don't want to just talk here and make up stuff that's not useful to anybody. So keep the comments coming in under the videos. I look at those comments. I try to reply to them if I need to, but I do read them, and if you guys have any kind of questions or something you'd like to see in the next episode, be sure to throw it in there. This gun is going to be getting a new scope here pretty quick. I'll probably do a video on mounting a scope on this rifle, so look to that one too. Anyway, that's about it for this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.